Hey groupers, Pastor Marshall here. We're going to talk about Hebrews and the end of chapter 6. And my message on Sunday, I started off by talking about what is something that you put your hope in and it failed you. So I'm wearing my Cowboys jersey. I have my Cowboys Boulevard sign. I have my Cowboys fan club sign. I have my Cowboys all-time greatest card set. And I have my Cowboys blanket. So what is something that you put your hope in and it failed you? What is something that you put your hope in and it didn't fail you? Talk about those two things. Just get everyone talking in your group. This is something that we can all talk about. There's no prerequisite knowledge required. And then you turn to Hebrews chapter 6. Verse 13 reminds us of God's promise to Abraham. And so that we're all on the same page, let's read God's promise. It first happens, he promises 3 times, but it first happens in Genesis 12, verses 2 and 3. So turn back and read Genesis 12, 2 and 3. And then he confirms his promise with an oath in Genesis 22, 15 through 18. So read the promise, read the oath. What is the promise confirmed by an oath? Let's just get that established because we're talking about Abraham. And then how did God, swearing by himself, encourage Abraham to be patient? And does that apply to us? Does God's promise to Abraham, do his promises apply to our patience? How do they apply to our patience? Verse 15 says that Abraham waited patiently. What makes being patient difficult for you? Personalize this. What makes being patient difficult for you? And then, how have you learned to be patient? How have you learned to succeed in being patient? What makes being patient easier for you? Well, then, what grounds does the author's confidence in those who have faith until the end stand on? What are the grounds of the author's confidence? Now, next, think about end times. No, not all the goofy stuff. How does the future certainty of God's promises to believers equip our hope? End times, God's promises going to come true. How does that equip our hope? Verse 17, next, think about this. Verse 17 says that God's nature is unchanging. Verse 19 says that his promises and oaths are unchanging. Brainstorm a little bit. Are there any other things in the universe that are unchanging? Well, then verse 19, one of my most favorite verses in all the Bible, that says, my hope is an anchor. How do hope and anchors function in the same way? What do hope and anchors have in common? How does this metaphor work? And then, how does this metaphor fail? How are hope and anchors different? And finally, verse 20 says that Jesus is our forerunner. How so? In what ways has Jesus forerun for us? And then I always like to remind you of our application as we think about hope being lost. Yesterday, Dak breaking his ankle. We think about hope being lost during this pandemic. What hope have you lost during this pandemic? And how can God restore your hope? How can putting your hope in him help you? Well, I hope that you have a wonderful group. And I look forward to seeing you next week as we start Hebrews chapter 7. God bless.